Hello and welcome back.
Hi. Welcome.
Hello. Welcome back to Living Richly with Curo, episode number 25. We are a quarter of a century if we were, an age.
If we were in age, yeah.
So excited to be back with you. We are thrilled for our special guest today. We have Kara Murphy, who we adore. And if you
Yes,
don't
yes,
know
yes.
her, we love her. Everybody loves her. And if you don't know her, you're in for a real treat. She is a badass. That's just the best way to describe her.
The
So,
only way to describe her.
only way, an investment badass, which a female investment badass, which I mean, how many people can claim that
Right.
title? So, we are so excited to have her. But before we get into that, we always love to do a quick A team catch up. So, this week has been crazy, but what is what is new with you, Atricia?
I don't know that I have anything new going on outside of work at this point. We
Yeah.
are in full fall client review mode. Everybody's back from vacation, kids are back in school, and now everybody needs something, right? So, I mean, we were just talking about this, but it's just been the emails and the calls. It's almost feel like they've come out of nowhere over the
Yeah.
last week or so. So I've been a little bit trying to keep my head above water, right? But I'm trying to do it, what they say, like a duck, right? Where you're paddling furiously,
Yes.
but you're looking really
You look
calm on
like
the
a
surface.
swan, just like beautifully swimming, no issues whatsoever. Meanwhile, your little feet
Yes,
are like, ah.
right. That's sort of the mode I'm in right now. But again, things are good. No reason to complain. Just really nothing new and exciting to report. I am going to try to get in at least one more round of golf before it gets way too cold. So hopefully I'll have some golf updates in the next couple weeks. But yeah, really nothing exciting to share. Oh, I take that back really quick because I love a good restaurant review.
Yes, please.
Sorry, almost forgot. So, new restaurant review in DC. There's a restaurant called um no, and now the name is like escaping me. It's the restaurant in a hotel down in Columbia Heights. Give me a moment. It'll come back to me. I'll make sure I'll have it by the
Okay.
end of the episode. But
Okay.
went there for dinner. It's really not a formalized restaurant. You feel like you're sitting in the lobby of the hotel.
Mm. Okay.
So I was a little bit nervous about what the food would be like, and it was amazing. Like
Ooh.
I had a salmon dish that came with like some mushrooms and almost like the sweet potato puree. They pureed it with carrots, which I was nervous about because, as you
Yeah.
know, we hate
Hmm.
carrots.
We hate
But
carrots.
it was absolutely delicious. We had cocktails. My old fashioned was fantastic. So
Ooh.
it was a legitimate, like 5 out of 5 dining experience as far as at least the food is concerned. So now I hate that I can't just call the name off the top. Like I had it and then it just escaped me, but I'll give it to you guys. But you got to go check it out. Really great service, really great cocktails, really good food. So,
All right. We can't wait to hear the name of it. It is
yeah.
going on the list. That sounds amazing.
I'll have it
That
in just a
sounds
moment.
okay. Sounds good. And I'm glad we're going to get some golf updates because, I was telling you on Monday, I'm
Yes.
like, it's been a while. It's been a
I
while since we've heard
know.
anything about your golf game. So we
It's
got to
been
get
a while
updates.
since I played. I've been between the travel and the work and the schedule. It just really hasn't been time, but I've got to make time before it gets too cold.
Yeah.
So,
Now, are you going to do any of those indoor places where you can go and practice during the winter just so you don't like completely lose everything you've
yeah.
learned?
Yeah. So I actually have, that's probably the last time I swung a golf club was at an indoor facility. It's called City Swing in
Yep.
DC. They actually just opened a location in Reston. But it's like golf simulator rooms. You can do it as a group. So my sister and I just kind of did it as an event where you can practice swing, you can play games, but then you can also do lessons with a golf pro on the simulator. So yeah, I plan to keep doing that through the fall and winter just so that I don't get rusty. Because it's definitely one of those things that if you don't continue to practice, you'll lose, all of the skills that you've learned. Kind of like, weightlifting. Like if you don't keep it up, you kind of lose that muscle tone.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You get the atrophy going. We don't want
Right.
that. No
Yeah,
golf
so that's the
atrophy.
plan.
Awesome. That sounds good. So I have an interesting thing. It's not really new. Well, it is kind of new. But an interesting thing that we're experimenting with my older son. So you know my views on allowance, and I've like
Hmm.
recorded a whole video. I believe that it's important to give our kids allowance, but I don't pay my kids to do chores that are just expected of them. So,
Right.
my 12-year-old takes out the trash, my 7-year-old sets the table, they both have to make their own bed, et cetera, and they're not getting paid for that. But I will pay them for like extra, yard work or things like that if they want to make some extra money and help out around the house. Well, this weekend, we started experimenting with the older one, um, paying him to listen to podcasts and TED Talks. And I even threw a book in there. I was like, if you read an entire book of my choosing, by the way, I choose
Okay.
what he's listening to. Otherwise, you can only imagine what he would pick. But,
Right.
I have a list of podcasts and TED Talks and, a few books on there. And I'm like, if you listen to these, so the deal with the podcast and the TED Talks is he has to give me his top 3 learnings from the podcast or the TED Talk, and
Okay.
then one thing he's planning to implement in his life as a result of something that he learned. And then for the book, it's going to be a higher ticket items. Like I want a full book report. Like I want you to present a book report to me about what you learned. But why not, right? If I'm going to pay them to do
Yeah.
things like yard work, why don't I pay them to listen to things that are going to be great for their mindset and, for the values that I want to establish in them. So I'm really excited. We started this past weekend with a TED talk about grit
Okay.
and resilience, which was great. And it was funny because my 12-year-old's like, I'm like, what'd you learn? What was your big takeaway? And he's like, I'm gonna be resilient and I'm gonna have grit. And I'm like, nah, I need more details. I'm like,
You
I
can't
want
use the title in your report.
yeah, I'm like, we no, not getting away with that. I want specifics like when it gets tough, how are you gonna show
Right.
resilience and how are you gonna show grit? And so anyway, we'll see. But I think it's a fun thing we're experimenting with, and I feel like it's a good investment.
Yes. I think that's a great idea. And especially for a kid his age, right, who is probably really motivated by having some extra money in his
Oh,
pocket. At
yeah.
least I know I was at that age. So that's a great way to make sure they're doing something that is actually beneficial and not, rotting away on TikTok or Twitch. Well, Twitch I think can be stimulating. So I won't be too negative on Twitch, but definitely not on TikTok.
Yeah, well, he's not on TikTok, thankfully, but he is on YouTube and he does, like, YouTube Shorts, and some of the stuff
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, some of the stuff is educational and fine, but
Yeah.
not the majority of it. So, yeah, to your
Right.
point, he's gonna be listening to things and he's gonna be watching things, so at least this way, I can kind of, like, direct, the messaging, and it's also been good for me because I have to listen to these things first,
Right,
obviously.
right.
I don't wanna just send him random podcasts or TED Talks that I don't agree with the message or whatnot,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
I love that.
But it's been fun.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes. I will
There's your
report back.
parenting tip for the week, guys.
Parenting tip for the week. Yes, exactly. All right. So I think while we're waiting for Kara to join, I think I
Mhm.
may just read a little bit of her bio but,
Of
before
course.
we have her on. So Kara Murphy, which, we introduced her unofficially as just a female investment badass. But her official title, because that's not what she puts out there as her official title, her official title is Chief Investment Officer of Kestra Investment Management. So most of you or many of you may not know that we use Kestra as our back office, and Kara is the Chief Investment Officer of the investment arm of our back office, which is Kestra. So prior to coming to Kestra, she acted as Chief Investment Officer for Goldman Sachs Personal Financial Management and then was CIO of a couple of other organizations. Started off in the industry as an analyst. And what was interesting is she got her bachelor's degree from Georgetown University, right in our backyard here in DC, from the School of Foreign Service, and she earned a master's degree from the University of Chicago. So one of the first questions that we're excited to ask her is just what does that career path looked like, right? From graduating to where she is today. So we look forward to hearing more.
Yeah. I'm excited. I love Kara. I think her background is so interesting. And I think the way she approaches investment management is so new and refreshing from what we're, I think, accustomed to for women who have been around this industry for several decades. It's just such a refreshing take. And I'm so excited to have her come and share with us today.
Yeah, me too. We're excited for you all to be able to hear from her. So without further ado, let's welcome Kara.
Yeah.
All right, Kara, welcome. So great to see
Hi,
you.
guys. So great to
Con-
see you. Thank you for having me.
yes,
Thank
confetti
you for
just
being
came.
here. Are you kidding?
Yeah, we're so excited. We've been looking forward to this. I think we booked this with you, I don't know, at least a month ago. And we
Yeah,
have been so excited about this conversation.
I am
For
too.
those of you, yeah, for those folks who know you, everybody loves you. And for those folks who do
Oh,
not have the pleasure yet of having met you, that they are in for a treat. So we are
yes.
super excited
Fabulous.
to have this conversation. So we just mentioned a little bit about your bio and your interesting, especially the education background that you have. So we're really interested to hear what brought you to this point in your career and what were some of those pivotal moments that you can share with us throughout your journey that, brought you to where you are today.
Yeah. So you probably, gathered from my bio that my educational background was all about international politics. I really thought I was either going to be a professor or a diplomat. So, if you had given me odds, I would have put pretty good odds on me, like being stationed in Timbuktu right now. And that still sounds fabulous, but
Yeah.
But I actually, after grad school, I worked for a professor of mine for a while. I was a Russia analyst focused on Eastern Europe as well. And it was like fascinating. I loved the work. It was so dynamic. Yeltsin was stepping down, Putin was taking over, the Russian ruble was being devalued. So there was a lot to chew on during that time period. And I really, really enjoyed it. But I was living in Chicago at the time and my father got ill. And so it was one of those moments where you're like, drop everything, moved back to the New York area to help take care of him. And during that time period, I knew I had to find a job, but I didn't really have a lot of emotional bandwidth to do anything
Right.
about it. So I heard about this position at Morgan Stanley at the time. So I threw off, it was the only resume I sent off. And it happened to be for a position working for an analyst for the chief investment officer at Morgan Stanley. I didn't even know what that meant. But I got my butt there. I got in like work appropriate attire, got myself to
Right.
the office, and I got the job. And I only half joke that it was February of 2000. So it was like the peak of the tech bubble. And like everybody else who had any, remote skills in this had been gobbled up.
Yeah.
And nobody else to choose from.
Oh, I doubt that. Highly doubt that.
Well, it is like half true. The other half is that like he needed somebody who could do research, who could analyze, and who could write. And I was like, okay, I know I can do those things. It's been writing about the Russian ruble devaluation, right? Like not stocks and bonds, but I was like, I'll figure that out. And then so like one of those first days, I remember my colleague who became a very close friend, who had a similar background to me. He kind of pulled me aside and was quietly like, so do you know the difference between a stock and a bond? And I was like, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, okay. He took this big pile of books and he handed them to me. And he's like, read these. I was like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
I can read.
Nice. Yeah.
And so that sort of like began the journey. But for like the first couple of years, I was still like, oh, this is just a stepping stone to something else. And then ironically, so then 9/11 happened. And I happened to be in the World Trade Center. I was I was as high as you could be and survive. Lost my cousin, lost colleagues. And as you can imagine, very traumatic time. And
Yeah.
so, my family, everybody in New York was sort of like wandering around in this haze for weeks and even months afterwards. And I knew a lot of people who were like, I'm dropping out of corporate America. I am moving to the other side of the country, right? Like people were making really big life changes. And I kept looking around me. I was like, I keep thinking that I'm in this way station, right? And I think it's time in my life that I need to kind of pick a direction, but I didn't know what it was. And so finally, like one day, my father had since passed away. So I'm talking with my mom and I'm on like one of my things, like, what do I do? Da, da, da. And she was like, Kara, like, maybe you're where you should be. And I was like, what? Nonsense.
No way.
But I sort of like tried that on for a while. And I was like, you know what? I actually think I really enjoy this. And it was like, it was such a shock because it was so different from how I had imagined my life. Like it really took a while for me to own that. But then with that, I like completed my CFA. I really dug in and I was able to say to myself, like, I want more of this. And so it was a sort of like interesting turning point where, you know, this traumatic experience of 9/11 actually made me lean into Wall Street. Most
Yeah.
people would point the other direction.
Right.
Yes.
But for me, I'm so grateful that that happened. And I think particularly as a woman in this business, I had very easily self-selected out, right? I saw Wall Street and I had all these images of like men and testosterone and activity and like hand slapping. And trust me, there's plenty of that. But I never saw that as a place where I would feel fulfilled. And sure enough, like I think my skill set really fits what I do and I really enjoy it. Um, but I'm convinced that there are other people out there who are doing the same thing that I did, who would have great careers in this business, who are just not seeing themselves and not giving it a try. So I always
Yeah.
like to talk to people about my experience and hope that I open up people's eyes a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. And isn't it amazing that that seemingly small comment that your mom made of just
Yeah.
like, well, maybe you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Like, why are you looking for something different when you're perhaps where you're supposed to be? And just that mindset shift of like, oh, okay, let me try that on and see how that feels. And it
Yeah, it
working
was such
out.
a big
So
one. And for her, I recounted that story to her like years later. She's like, really?
yeah.
For
Yeah.
her, it was like no big deal. That for me was really meaningful.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, and I just think it's such a maybe we should do some sort of a study, but it's I noticed because Ann and I have a background where we both had very different focuses. And Ann wanted to work for the World Bank. I wanted to work for Coca-Cola in Latin America. Like we had these such different focuses and somehow found ourselves here. So
Yeah.
maybe, you know, there is this divine sort of maneuvering to get us where we need to be so that other people can see us and see themselves in this work. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's very powerful.
Love that.
And speaking of a lack of women at your level, Kara, just for fun, I looked up some statistics prior to bringing you on. Do you know, or would you like to guess, what percentage of women in the United States, we're actually lower than the global average, not surprisingly, but what percentage of women in the United States hold the same title that you hold of Chief Investment Officer?
Oh,
Do you know, or would you care to guess?
I would guess single digits.
Definitely single digits. Yes, that is accurate. Yes.
I'm guessing
So-
from your reaction, it's low single digits.
It's 8%. So in the
Okay,
United
okay.
States, 8%. The global average is 9. So we're just slightly under the global
Wow.
average. But
Wow.
the reason that you didn't see yourself in Wall Street is
Mhm.
because you didn't see yourself
looking
in Wall Street. Fair. But you know what? The three of us just, you know, with little changes that we can make and exposing other young women and other women, period, to see themselves in us, like, let's keep being that example so other women don't think the same things that the three of us
Yeah.
have thought, right?
Right,
They
absolutely.
actually see a path and a future. And Atricia and I talk about this all the time that our male colleagues are wonderful advisors. This is nothing against our male colleagues. And not but, because that kind of negates what I just said. And female advisors are amazing. Like we're so great at nurturing and we're great at the long-term relationship. And this
100%.
is such an amazing career for women. So hopefully if there's
And-
one
and-
thing
By the way, so I was going to add, and
not but
there's all this research into behavioral finance and gender studies that have been done on investors going back decades now. And the evidence is very conclusive that women tend to make better investment decisions than men. When I saw that, I mean, talk about mind blown.
Right.
Mhm.
But part of what makes women make better investment decisions is a greater sense of humility. And you know, like not having as much overconfidence, and I
Yes.
think that serves all of us really well. Like we often fight against that, but it actually, I think, helps make better decisions, whether you're picking stocks like I am or working on a financial plan with a client like you guys are.
Yeah, absolutely. Like questioning, just being open to the fact that we don't know it all, right? And just that like
Right.
constant curiosity and
Yeah.
constantly asking questions to make sure that we learn more. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, people often say that women second guess themselves a lot in their decision making, but that probably can be very helpful when making investment selections to
Yeah,
second guess your
100%. No,
decision
I'm
making.
very glad to have my male colleagues because sometimes they're like, come on, this is great. I'm like, okay.
Okay, sure.
It's good to have a mix,
Yes.
But I think sometimes we downplay how important and how positive that skill can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so just a little more personal question. As the chief investment officer of a very large company and also a mother, how do you balance the responsibilities of your demanding career and your duties at home? And do you have any advice, or what advice would you give career women who are, in the same challenges of balancing demanding careers with home life?
So part of my answer would be that I don't always do it very well. My house is not perfect. Yeah, like we have forgotten lunches. So I have 3 kids. You ladies know, but for listeners, I have 3 kids. They're like 11, 13, and 16 right now. And they're my joy, but I also I can't do everything, right? So I have a rule: no bake sales.
I love that.
I will happily buy that loaf of banana bread, but I'm not staying up late at night making it.
So I have had that conversation with my children as well. Happy to buy the things. I'm not baking them.
I'm not a cupcake mom. I'm not making the cupcakes.
Nope.
Yeah. So, and I've talked to other people who are like, oh, baking is such a core part of our family. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
my kids can do the baking. I'm fine. So it's about really being very, very disciplined about identifying what's important. And, with my kids, if they have, my daughter had an open house recently and it wasn't on our calendar and it was in the middle of an afternoon and I moved everything around so that I could be there because I knew it was important to her. But my son was playing flag football and I'd been to a bunch of his games. My husband was going to be able to be at the next one. I had a conflict, so I didn't go to that one. So you got to pick those things and make sure that you're aligned with what's important with your kids and that you're showing up. And then you're not doing a lot of the fluff, right? I also don't stuff envelopes because I'm not with the kids. I'm not part of the community. So I really try to identify those things that are going to make a difference. And then you got to let the other stuff go.
Yeah.
And it's okay that, my floor is not swept and my bed is unmade.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Being focused.
Yes, and
great
some of the
advice.
advice I give Anne as well, because of course I don't have children, but I obviously sympathize with the struggles of women who are doing both, because sometimes I forget to feed myself. So I'm like, how are you doing this and also caring for other human beings? I'm completely impressed. But the thing I always like to tell her is, I think it is so amazing for children to see, really, to use the expression again, badass women, right? Doing really big, important things, right? And still showing up and being their mom. So I think even when the lunches get missed, there's still so much power in them seeing you and what you do every day. So kudos to you ladies and all the other women
I
who
hope
do
so, because much of the time my kids are like, whatever, mom.
Well, you do have 3 teenagers at home. I'm sure they'll look back and appreciate it when they're older.
They also keep me humble, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Amen to that. The other thing, Kara, that Atricia and I have talked about actually on this podcast before is our generation and the way that we parent. We tend to not want to disappoint our children, and we tend to want to protect them from adversity and from challenges. And actually that's doing them a massive disservice. So anytime I disappoint my children, which is on the regular, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful I'm disappointing my children right now. This is going to be so good for them in the long run. I'm making them stronger. There's something about that
You're welcome.
a lot better.
Right?
Yeah. Like, mommy, I'm mad at you. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you're mad at me. That is just so great. And they're like, what? That's not your reaction.
I
I
was
love it.
expecting. It's so great. Like,
Yeah.
what a wonderful
So
reframing, right?
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
Thank
And
you for
maybe it's
that.
like a self-defense mechanism. I don't know, but that's what I'm going with.
Yeah.
I heard yeah, like a child psychologist talk about this, and I was like, I am latching on to that, and I'm just gonna be grateful when I
Yes.
disappoint my children because it's gonna happen. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
I totally
Yeah.
agree. And I'm a big believer in like kids need to have those little struggles along the way because
Yeah.
you can't go from no struggle to big struggle like when you go off to college or become an
Yeah.
adult. Like it's got to be a gradual process. It's
Absolutely.
just
Because
like when
that's
my
the
kids
real
tell me
life.
they're bored, I'm like, good, me too. Me too.
Yeah. It's it's good to be. It's a blessing to be bored sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about when you came to Kestra Investment Management, which we call Kim for
Yeah.
short. Kara runs Kim, which is a little of a mouthful sometimes. But the reality, Kara, is that Kim was not Kim. Kim did not exist when you
Yeah.
got to Kestra. So and actually we started our relationships with Kestra around the same time
Yeah.
in 2021. And I remember just, and reflecting over the last few years, seeing you basically with this startup, right? Like creating something from
Yeah.
scratch and what it has turned out to be. And I know where you all are going to take it next is even more amazing. But tell us, like, how did you approach that massive project of like, I have nothing currently, and I am supposed to stand up this department called Kestra Investment Management. Like, how did you even approach that project? Just talk us through what that looked like.
So I will say this is my favorite job I've ever had. So that's good.
Yeah, that is
Because
good.
it has been a really big endeavor. And if you recall, I came here from Goldman Sachs. It's a very prestigious firm like within the investment world. I had tons of resources. I had access to a lot of stuff. I'd worked really hard to build this team that I believed in and to kind of knit all this stuff together. When I got the call from Kestra, I was like, I'm not interested. But the more I talked about it, the more I was like, I think I could really enjoy this. And ultimately, what I did was I sort of like wrote down what a day at Goldman Sachs looked like and what a day I thought would look like at Kestra. And it was like all the same things, but I was able to spend more time doing the things I wanted versus where I was. And so, I had the same title, I same number of people reporting to me. Um, but here at Kestra, I was able to like really create something and I was able to
Mhm.
build something that I felt like was really helpful. So that was sort of the background. So when I came then, it was really about like I have really enjoyed in my career as I've been able to see more and more how this sort of like abstract investment decision that I make actually impacts lives.
Mm.
And that's been a great joy of being in this position. So initially it was talking with a lot of people. Sort of I had this view of like what we would build, but I had to test it out. And so I talked with folks like you guys and your peers and said, how can I help? What can I do? What are your biggest struggles? What are you missing? Because I also didn't want to just build another whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
we didn't need another one of those. There are plenty of great investors out there who offer, good solutions. So we had to have something that was helpful, something that we could do that was different, and something that we could implement. So it came down to I always describe like the three pillars of Kim, and one is investment research and commentary. And I mentioned to you my first role at Morgan Stanley. Like that's what I did. I just
Mhm.
researched and wrote about the markets. Now we've added in video, so that's the one thing
Yes.
that's changed big since then. We manage portfolios and we support advisors. And like those three things have been consistent since we started, but we keep adding more. Right. And I love that partnership ability, being able to think and work with advisors and think about how we can support them supporting their clients. And we can be creative in a way that, I wouldn't be able to at other firms that I've worked at. And you guys probably remember like last year we had our big conference and I gave a talk talking about Barbie and investing.
Yes.
Right? I'm like, I
Yeah.
couldn't have done this anywhere else.
Right. That was amazing.
But it's just like the ability to use story to bring like complex financial ideas to people and help understand them. It's just like I love it. It's so fun.
That is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, and we enjoy it. And I think I mentioned it before you actually joined us. There's such a refreshing feeling about the way you and Kestra run that team, or Kim runs that team together. Who would have thought you would show up at an investment conference and hear your market update, mention Barbie or Beanie Babies, right? It's just such a refreshing take on what we've been listening to and hearing, and being able to experience it in a new way is fantastic. So thank you for that.
Yeah, the investing world doesn't have to be boring. Like
Right.
who wrote the rule that says that you have to
Yes.
show up in like a pinstripe suit and talk,
Yes.
statistics, or like why not make it interesting? It's something, it's something that all of us are dealing with, and clients want us to be able to communicate with them that way too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Like everybody wants you to be real. You're a
yeah.
person. Actually, I'll tell a funny story. So a bunch of years ago, I was planning this video series, and it was meant to be an educational series. So like, what's a stock? What's a bond? Right? Like answering all those questions that I didn't know how to answer when I first started on Wall Street, and to do it in a fun way, and to like use story. And so I had one story about my grandfather, who was an accountant, like very numerate, very smart man. But after the crash of 1987, he sold all his stocks and then never bought another stock, right? He lived
Wow.
another 30, 40 years. And like, what a huge mess, right? And so I use that story often to explain how like you have to roll with some of these downturns. And if he had only waited like a year or two, he would have made all his money back and then way more. And so I have this story in the script about my grandfather. And then it goes through like compliance and legal and all these approval processes. And I just get one note back, and it said, please remove all personal references. I was like, what?
That's the whole story.
Here. It's my face, and we're about like personal finance. You don't want me to talk about my family? But I use that to highlight how like I think a lot of this industry is just very, very uncomfortable with the personal, but that's what we do, right?
Yeah.
Like we have to be able to do all the hard stuff and all the analysis and understanding what's happening in the market, but we also have to make it real to people. That's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That story about your grandfather is actually probably a really good segue to our next question. So Kim has expanded very quickly. You guys are managing a large amount of assets. And as we all know, markets can be volatile and challenging.
Yes.
How do you stay grounded in the decision making, right? And what advice would you give investors about remaining calm during volatile and challenging times?
So this is such an important piece, I think, of what we do. And we talked about curiosity before and humility. So those are two of our core values. We also have collaboration. It's very important that we work together as a team, and discipline. And it's that collaboration and discipline that I think are very, very important in those times of trouble that you talk about. So one is that it's very important that we have an environment where people are willing to challenge each other. I have Derek, who's our head of portfolio management, who sits right here, and he'll regularly be like, I don't know, sure. We love Derek. Shout out to Derek.
Hi, Derek.
And so like I appreciate that, right? And we try to create an environment where anybody on the team can kind of like bring to us something else that they're seeing and be like, what about this? And that's a really important part of the process. And I think allowing people to change their mind, right? You can't do it willy-nilly, but if you're presented with new evidence that suggests something different than what you started out with, you gotta take that, and you gotta make that decision quickly, right? You can't sit on it for too long either. But then the other piece is being disciplined. So I'll give an example of how we do it at Kim, and that's we have this playbook for rebalancing, right? So most portfolios have some amount in stocks, some amount in bonds. And in March of 2020, you had this sort of strange instance when, in a very short period of time, stocks went down very significantly. So all of a sudden, people had more bonds than stocks than what their financial plan would have suggested. So, but we had a playbook that when the difference becomes that great, you rebalance, you bring them back into alignment. If we had to make that decision in the midst of COVID for the first time, when stocks are dropping like 7-8% a day, it would have been horrible, and we would have made I'm sure the wrong decision. But we're like, oh, here's our playbook. We got to test it out because market conditions are not great, right? So we got to make sure we can implement, but we got to stick with that playbook. And sure enough, and we had to do that knowing that we were going to cause distress, right? So we made the trade, and then we immediately started calling people and saying, hey, you're going to see more stocks in your portfolio. Here's why we think it's really important. And it's part of our playbook. And we talked about the playbook. So having all of that ready to go and building it in times of sort of like ease and calm seas allows you to be a little bit more thoughtful about it. And I'll give one other quick example, which is always an inspiration for me, which is my husband was in the Navy. And I love hearing his stories about being on the submarine and all like the training that they had to do. It just like boggles my mind. But like any part of the military, right? You do it over and over and over again. So you create that muscle memory so that when an emergency really happens, you just rely on that muscle memory to do it. And he always told a story about when they would practice for a fire on board. So you can imagine in a submarine being deep undersea, a fire is going to use up all the oxygen in no time. So they would run these drills where they would turn off all the lights. They would have to find a gas mask, put it on, and then you have to daisy chain from one guy to the other in the dark, right? And you have like under 2 minutes to be able to do it. And like, to me, that sounds terrifying. And he was like, yeah,
Just another day on a submarine, you know.
just another day. Yeah. And like, when something's happening, when there's some emergency, he's so calm about it. But again, it's because he's got that muscle memory. He's worked at it. It's not something that like just happened to him, right? He's trained for it. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Just like any other muscle that you train. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
absolutely.
I love we always talk about just being a rules-based investor and
Yes.
what you're talking about with the playbook and having the discipline is so key. And to create that when the world is not coming to an
Right.
end, like
Yeah.
during COVID or during the tech bubble bursting or what,
Not a good time to figure it out.
yeah, not a good time when you're already panicking emotionally to try to figure out what to do. And that's when investors really make dire mistakes. And that, to your grandfather's story, that can negatively impact them the rest of their lives.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But the rules also apply during euphoria too, right? When
Mhm.
things are going
Yes.
really, really well and
Yes.
people want to get away from the rule book, like, let's
Yes.
just do this. Let's
Yes.
buy all of NVIDIA, right?
Yes.
I can't
It's
tell you how
like,
many
no,
times I've
no,
heard that
no.
recently.
Remember our playbook here.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's nothing worse than markets, hitting all-time highs, I don't know, 30 plus times in a year. Not sure when that's happened, maybe 2024. And they're like, yeah, I should maybe take on a little bit more risk in the portfolio. And I'm like, oh gosh,
Here we go.
here we go. So
But that's also where like you need a trusted partner who can call you out on it because we're
Yeah.
human. That's a very
Right.
human instinct, right? So we have to recognize that we all have this tendency to do it. Same thing, like 75% of all Americans think that they're an above average driver, right? Like really?
right.
So
It's
we have
simply
to put speed
impossible.
limits, right? To prevent us from going too fast. And that's where you guys have such an important role, is being that trusted person to be like, you know what? Let's talk about this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what we're here to do. A lot of our job, we always joke that we're like 90% behavioral coaches and marriage counselors and 10% financial advisors.
Yeah.
So Kara, the name of our podcast, as you know, is Living Richly. And one of the questions that we love to ask our guests is, what does living richly mean to you?
Ooh, I love that. So as you guys know, I sign off all my videos with invest
Mhm.
wisely, live richly.
Yes.
For me, that means being able to be me wherever I am. And we talked a little bit about like what I've loved about working here at Kestra. And it's because like I can wear a pink sequin suit on stage and nobody's gonna tell me to get down.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can show up at work and I can be me. I can go home and I can be me. And I have the ability to sort of pick and choose those times when, I need to go to my kid's school or when I need to fly across the country and meet with a client. So having that like allows me to, I think, be much more productive, much more engaged, and just like feel much better about what it is that I do. And it makes it a whole lot more fun too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We all spend so much time doing the thing that we do, right? Our work, our job, our careers. And so being able to experience that joy, I think, is so important, because otherwise, what are we doing? Life is so
Yeah.
precious, so finite.
Totally.
Like, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I often
That-
tell our team I spend more time with you guys than I do with my sister, with my friends,
Yeah.
with my family. So we might as well show up and enjoy what we do and have a good time doing
Yes.
it.
Yes. It's so
Yes.
important.
Awesome. So any parting wisdom, advice, anything else you want to share, Kara, before we let you run for the day?
So maybe I'll add one more thing that's helped me throughout my career. And this I think goes throughout life. And it is to be curious about pain or like discomfort or difficulty, right? So as you're kind of like going through your workday, sometimes there are certain processes or like, oh my God, the end of every month I have to do this and it takes forever. Like become curious about it, unpack it. Like, why is that? Is there a way that we can make that process better to make it a little bit easier? And I give the example of like a trick knee, right? If you're like walking down the street and your knee is really bothering you, you can power through and just be like, no, I'm going to ignore the pain. But then at the end of the day, it's going to be all swollen. It's going to be a lot worse. You could sit down and be like, oh my God, my knee's in pain. I'm not going to do anything. But then you miss out, right? Instead, become curious about it. Does it hurt only when I'm running? Does it hurt if I'm wearing this type of shoe, right? So that way you get to be able to fix it. I think a lot of times our instinct is to withdraw from pain or to hide under the covers or whatever it is. But the more that you can kind of like lean into that, the more you can improve, whatever it is that you're doing or have better connections with the people around you. And I think that it took me a long time to be able to learn that, and I'm still learning. But I think it's a helpful tool.
Yeah, I love that.
Whoa.
I love that. Let's just all sit with that for a minute.
Right. I think I'm going to skip my therapy session this week. Okay. I've got enough to ruminate on today. So
yeah, that is awesome. Great advice. Great and unique advice. I don't think I've ever heard someone say that the way that you said that. That was fantastic.
Yeah, it's not going to be fun necessarily. I'll just warn you.
Yeah, but need it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that wraps us. Kara, thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, we really appreciate it. We appreciate your advice and sharing, and we appreciate everything that you do to support us and our firm and the entire Kestra ecosystem. So thank you so much.
Thank
all
you
of your
for
hard work
and for being lovely ladies. Again, like what a joy that I get to know you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so
much.
much. So, and thanks to all of our listeners. Our ask this week is share this episode with the woman in your life who you would call a badass. Think of all the women you know. Think of the most badass one of them and share this episode with them. That was our ask this week. In addition, we want to hear from you. So if you have questions, please send them our way. You can email those to podcast@curoprivatewealth.com. And if we answer your question on our podcast, we will send you an Amazon gift card as a thank you. Money. It's like Prime Week or something. You could probably use an Amazon gift card. So make sure too that you give us a rating and review. Let us know what you enjoyed about our episode. Thank you again for tuning in. We will see you here next week. And as always, Atricia,
live richly.